The scent of rain-soaked earth filled the small church as Rebecca Turner clutched the crumpled letter in her trembling hands, tears streaming down her face like the storm that had passed through Willow Creek the night before. The afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across the worn wooden pews where she sat alone, unaware that her solitude would soon be interrupted by a man who would change her life forever. Rebecca had arrived in Willow Creek, Colorado just 3 weeks prior, in the spring of 1876. The mining town nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains had seemed like the perfect escape from her life in Boston, a life that had become unbearable after her father's gambling debts had forced her to break her engagement to the son of one of Boston's most prominent families. Her Aunt Martha had invited her to come west, promising a fresh start in a place where no one knew her name or her shame. But now, Aunt Martha was gone too, taken by the fever that had swept through the mining camps. The letter in Rebecca's hand, delivered just hours ago, contained the final blow. Her father had died, leaving nothing but debts and the cold rejection of what remained of her family back east. "You have no home to return to," the letter had stated plainly. "The house has been seized along with all possessions. It would be best if you remained where you are." Rebecca buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. She had no one now, no family, no prospects, and barely enough money to last a month. The church had become her refuge, the only place in this dusty frontier town where she could shed tears without prying eyes. Or so she thought. The creak of the church door startled her, and Rebecca hastily tried to wipe away her tears, stuffing the letter into the pocket of her simple blue dress. Heavy footsteps echoed in the empty church, and she kept her head down, hoping whoever had entered would mind their business and leave her be. The footsteps stopped beside her pew. Rebecca kept her eyes fixed on her lap, watching as droplets of her tears darkened the fabric of her dress. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep but gentle, tinged with a drawl that marked him as a local. Rebecca didn't look up. "I'm fine, thank you," she whispered, her voice betraying her with a crack. Just seeking a moment of peace." There was silence, and she thought perhaps he had taken the hint and left. Then, to her surprise, she heard the rustle of clothing as someone knelt beside the pew. Looking up through tear-blurred eyes, Rebecca found herself face to face with a man she recognized from town, the cowboy who worked at the Hanson Ranch outside of Willow Creek. "Cole Preston," he said simply, extending a weathered hand. "And I don't mean to intrude, but in my experience, folks don't usually come to an empty church in the middle of a Tuesday to cry unless something's mighty wrong." Rebecca stared at his hand for a moment before reluctantly taking it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but careful, as though he was used to handling things that might break. "Rebecca Turner," she replied, quickly withdrawing her hand and dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "And truly, Mr. Preston, I appreciate your concern, but this is a private matter." Cole's blue eyes, clear as the Colorado sky, studied her face. There was no judgment there, only a quiet understanding that surprised her. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 28 or 29, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at the edges of his hat, which he had respectfully removed upon entering the church. "I understand private matters, Miss Turner," he said. "Lost my folks when I was 16, been making my own way ever since." "I'm sorry for your loss," Rebecca replied automatically, the social graces ingrained in her from childhood taking over. Cole nodded his thanks. "The thing about grief, Miss Turner, is it's a heavy load to carry alone." The simple truth in his words broke something inside her. Fresh tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, and before she could stop herself, The whole story came tumbling out: her father's debts, her broken engagement, her journey west, and now the final loss of any hope of returning home. "I have no one," she finished, clutching the handkerchief tightly. "And now I have nowhere to go." Cole listened without interrupting, his expression somber. When she finished, he shifted from his kneeling position to sit beside her in the pew, keeping a respectful distance. "Willow Creek's not much," he said after a moment, "but it's full of folks who have come here looking for a second chance. Martha Turner was well respected. Being her niece means something here." "I barely knew her," Rebecca admitted. "We exchanged letters occasionally, but I hadn't seen her since I was a child." "She spoke of you," Cole said, surprising her. "I delivered supplies to her house sometimes. She was proud that you were coming west. Said you had backbone, which is about the highest compliment Martha ever gave anyone." A ghost of a smile crossed Rebecca's face. That sounded like the aunt she remembered, stern but fair, with little patience for weakness. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she confessed. "The boarding house where I'm staying. I can't afford it past this month." Cole was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. "Mrs. Hanson, my employer's wife, has been looking for help at the ranch house. Their last housekeeper left to get married last month. It's not fancy work, but it's honest and includes room and board." Rebecca bristled slightly. "I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Preston, and I'm not offering it," he replied firmly. "Martha mentioned you were educated. Mrs. Hanson has twin girls, 8 years old, wild as mountain goats. She's been hoping to find someone who could teach them some book learning along with helping around the house. If you're interested, I could speak to her." Rebecca hesitated. She had never worked as a housekeeper before. In Boston, her family had employed servants until their fortunes failed. But her options were few, and the thought of a roof over her head and food on her table was too tempting to dismiss out of pride. I would be grateful if you would speak to her," she finally said. Cole stood, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll do that then. In the meantime—" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "The ranch is having a social gathering this Saturday, sort of a tradition when spring comes. There'll be food, music. Might do you good to meet some folks." Rebecca looked at the invitation he held out, then back at his face. There was no pity there, just a straightforward offer. "Thank you, Mr. Preston," she said, taking the small card. "I'll consider it." He nodded once, then paused as if wanting to say something more. Instead, he simply touched the brim of his hat in a polite gesture. "Miss Turner," he said, "whatever's in that letter you're holding so tight it's part of your past. Willow Creek could be your future if you give it a chance." With that, he turned and walked down the aisle, his spurs jingling softly with each step. The church door creaked open and closed, leaving Rebecca alone again, but somehow the silence felt different now. Less empty, less final. She looked down at the invitation in her hand, then at the tear-stained letter peeking from her pocket. With a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and stood. The church had been her refuge in sorrow, but perhaps it had also become the starting point for something new. Outside the church, the late afternoon sun bathed Willow Creek in golden light, and for the first time since arriving, Rebecca found herself noticing the beauty of the mountains that surrounded the town. As she walked back to the boarding house, she realized she was already looking forward to Saturday. 2 days later, Rebecca found herself standing at the entrance to the Hanson ranch, clutching a small carpet bag containing her few belongings. The interview with Mrs. Hanson had gone better than expected, and the woman had offered her the position on the spot, inviting her to move into the small room off the kitchen immediately. "The girls need a firm hand," Mrs. Hanson had told her, a robust woman with kind eyes and practical manners. My husband and I have our hands full with the ranch, especially now that the spring calving season is upon us. Can you start tomorrow?" Rebecca had agreed, relieved to leave the boarding house before her funds were completely exhausted. Now, as she approached the sprawling ranch house, she felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. This was not the life she had imagined for herself, but she would make it work. She had to. A commotion from the barn caught her attention. Several men were attempting to control a wild-eyed horse that reared and bucked, its powerful legs kicking at the air. Among them, she recognized Cole Preston, his hat pushed back on his head as he called instructions to the others. Rebecca paused to watch, fascinated despite herself. Cole moved with a confident grace around the animal, never raising his voice, his movements slow and deliberate. Gradually, the horse calmed, allowing Cole to approach and place a gentle hand on its neck. "He has a way with the difficult ones," a voice said beside her, making Rebecca jump. A young woman about her age stood there, wiping her hands on an apron. "You must be Miss Turner. I'm Sarah, the cook. Mrs. Hanson asked me to show you to your room when you arrived." "Thank you," Rebecca said, tearing her gaze away from the scene at the barn. "I appreciate it." "You picked a good time to arrive," Sarah continued as she led Rebecca toward the house. "Everyone's in high spirits about the social tomorrow, and between you and me, I think Mrs. Hanson is relieved to have another woman around who can teach those girls some manners. They've been running wild since they were born." The Hanson home was larger than Rebecca had expected, built of solid timber with wide windows that caught the mountain light. Inside, it was comfortable rather than fancy, with well-worn furniture and colorful quilts that gave it a homey feel. Sarah showed her to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that overlooked a kitchen garden. "It's not much," Sarah said apologetically, "but it's private, and in winter, it's the warmest room in the house because of the kitchen next door." "It's perfect," Rebecca replied honestly. After weeks in the noisy boarding house, the prospect of privacy was a luxury. "Mrs. Hanson and the girls are visiting neighbors today, but they'll be back for supper," Sarah explained. "Mr. Hanson is out with the hands checking the north pasture. You can get settled, and I'll call you when the meal's ready." Left alone, Rebecca unpacked her meager belongings, arranging her few books on a small shelf above the bed. Among them was a volume of poetry her father had given her on her 16th birthday, before the gambling and drinking had taken hold of him. She ran her fingers over the embossed cover, then resolutely placed it on the shelf. The past was the past. Later, at the supper table, Rebecca met the Hanson twins, Emma and Elizabeth, two blonde whirlwinds who bombarded her with questions between mouthfuls of Sarah's beef stew. "Can you ride a horse?" Emma demanded. "You know any stories?" Elizabeth chimed in. "Girls, Mrs. Hanson admonished, let Miss Turner eat her supper in peace. There will be plenty of time for questions tomorrow when she begins your lessons." Mr. Hanson, a gruff man with kind eyes similar to his wife's, nodded approvingly at Rebecca. "The girls need schooling proper. Been trying to teach them myself, but between the ranch and the new contracts with the railroad, ain't been much time." "I'll do my best, sir," Rebecca assured him. The conversation turned to ranch matters: cattle prices, the railroad's expansion into the territory, and preparations for the social the next day. Rebecca listened quietly, trying to absorb the unfamiliar terms and concerns that seemed to occupy these people's lives. "Preston did well with that new stallion today," Mr. Hanson remarked. "Got a way about him, that boy. Best hand I ever hired." "Cole's been with us 5 years now," Mrs. Hanson explained to Rebecca. "Came west from Tennessee after the war looking for work. honest as the day is long, and the best horseman in 3 counties. Rebecca nodded politely, remembering Cole's quiet confidence in the church and with the horse. There was something about him that spoke of depth, of experiences that had shaped him into the man he was. "He's coming to the social, ain't he?" Mr. Hanson asked his wife. "Said he might," Mrs. Hanson replied with a slight smile. "Though you know Cole never won for crowds." After supper, Rebecca helped Sarah clear the dishes, despite Mrs. Hanson's protests that it wasn't necessary yet. "I prefer to start as I mean to go on," Rebecca explained, "and I've never been one to sit idle." Later, as she prepared for bed in her new room, Rebecca heard the distant sound of a harmonica playing somewhere outside. The melody was haunting and beautiful, drifting through her open window on the cool night air. She moved to the window and looked out, trying to locate the source of the music. In the soft glow of a lantern hung from the barn door, she saw Cole, sitting on a bench, the small instrument in his hands. His eyes were closed as he played, his expression one of complete absorption. It was a side of the cowboy she hadn't expected, this sensitivity, this artistry. Rebecca stood watching and listening until the melody ended and Cole put the harmonica away, disappearing into the darkness toward what she assumed were the bunkhouses where the ranch hands stayed. She closed her window slowly, wondering what other surprises this new life might hold. Saturday dawned clear and warm, the kind of spring day that hinted at the summer to come. The Hanson ranch buzzed with activity as preparations for the social reached their peak. Tables were set up in the yard, decorated with wildflowers gathered by the twins. Sarah and Mrs. Hanson worked feverishly in the kitchen, producing pies and cakes that filled the house with mouth-watering aromas. Rebecca spent the morning helping the girls clean up their room and select appropriate dresses for the occasion, using the opportunity to assess their educational needs. They were bright children, if undisciplined, and their excitement about having a teacher was encouraging. "Will you dance at the social, Miss Turner?" Elizabeth asked as Rebecca helped her braid her hair. "I don't know many people here yet," Rebecca replied cautiously. "Cole dances real good," Emma informed her, sitting cross-legged on the bed. "He taught us last Christmas when it snowed so much nobody could leave for days." Rebecca felt a flush rise to her cheeks and busied herself with a stubborn tangle in Elizabeth's hair. "Is that so?" "Mama says he's the best catch in the county," Emma continued, oblivious to Rebecca's discomfort. "But he don't court nobody. Sarah says it's 'cause his heart got broke in the war." "Emma," Elizabeth scolded, "that's a secret. Sarah told us not to tell." Rebecca gently turned Emma's face toward her. "It's not polite to repeat private matters about others," she said firmly, "even if they are interesting." Emma looked suitably chastised, and Rebecca felt a twinge of guilt for her severity. But she was also curious what had happened to Cole during the war. He would have been very young then, perhaps not even 20. The thought of him, little more than a boy, facing the horrors of battle made her heart ache unexpectedly. By late afternoon, wagons and riders began arriving at the ranch. Families from neighboring homesteads, ranch hands from other properties, and townsfolk from Willow Creek all converged on the Hanson spread, bearing dishes to share and instruments to play. The atmosphere was festive, with children running and playing while adults greeted old friends and made new acquaintances. Rebecca, wearing her best dress, a simple blue cotton with white trim that had seen better days, but was still presentable, helped Mrs. Hanson welcome guests and direct them to the food tables. She was introduced to so many people that their names became a blur, but everyone was welcoming, curious about the newcomer from the east. "Boston, eh?" An older woman named Mrs. Whitaker commented. "My sister lives in Philadelphia. Says you Easterners think we're all savages out here." "Not at all," Rebecca assured her. "I find the people here refreshingly direct." Mrs. Whittaker laughed. "That's a diplomatic way of saying we're blunt as fence posts." As the sun began to set, lanterns were lit around the yard, and several men took up instruments: a fiddle, a banjo, a guitar, and to Rebecca's surprise, Cole with his harmonica. A space was cleared for dancing, and Mr. Hanson led his wife out for the first dance, setting off a flurry of couples forming. Rebecca stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the lively scene. The music was different from the formal waltzes and quadrilles she was used to, but infectiously joyful. The dancers moved with an exuberant energy that made her smile. "Miss Turner." She turned to find Cole standing beside her, his harmonica now in his pocket. He was dressed in clean clothes, his hair damp as if freshly washed, and he'd shaved the stubble that had been on his jaw when she'd seen him at the church. "Mr. Preston," she acknowledged with a nod. "I didn't know you were a musician." A slight smile curved his lips. "Just something I picked up along the way, not much else to do during long nights on the trail." "You play beautifully," she said honestly. "Thank you." He looked out at the dancers for a moment, then back at her. "Are you settling in all right?" "Yes, everyone has been very kind. The twins are." "Energetic but eager to learn," Cole chuckled. "They're good girls at heart, just need some direction." There was a brief, awkward silence between them, filled by the music and laughter around them. Rebecca found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way the lantern light caught in his eyes. "Would you care to dance, Miss Turner?" he asked suddenly. Turning to face her fully, Rebecca hesitated. It had been a long time since she'd danced, and never to music like this. "I'm afraid I don't know the steps." "There aren't any particular steps," Cole assured her. "You just follow the music and your partner." Before she could overthink it, Rebecca nodded. "Then yes, Mr. Preston, I would like to dance." He led her to the edge of the dancing area, placing one hand lightly at her waist and taking her hand with the other. The touch was proper but sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Just follow me," he said softly, and then they were moving. The dance was nothing like the formal affairs Rebecca was accustomed to. It was lively and free, with Cole guiding her through turns and steps that seemed to flow naturally with the music. At first she was stiff, concerned about making mistakes, but gradually she relaxed into the rhythm, finding joy in the movement. Cole was an excellent dancer, sure-footed and confident without being showy. He kept a respectful distance between them, but there was an undeniable connection as they moved together. Rebecca found herself laughing as he spun her, the worries of the past weeks momentarily forgotten in the simple pleasure of the dance. When the music ended, they were both slightly breathless. Cole's eyes held hers for a long moment before he stepped back, releasing her hand. "You dance well for someone who claims not to know the steps," he said with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I had a good teacher," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. The moment was interrupted by Elizabeth and Emma, who came running up to tug at Cole's arms. "You promised to dance with us too," Elizabeth reminded him. "So I did," he agreed, giving Rebecca an apologetic look. "Duty calls, Miss Turner." "Of course," she said, watching with amusement as the girls dragged him away for their promised dance. For the rest of the evening, Rebecca found herself sought out by various partners' young ranch hands eager to dance with the new woman in town, and even Mr. Hanson for a more sedate number. But her gaze kept returning to Cole, watching as he danced with the children, helped an elderly couple to seats near the food table, and occasionally rejoined the musicians with his harmonica. Late in the evening, as the celebration began to wind down and families with young children started to depart, Rebecca found a quiet spot away from the main gathering. The night air was cool but not cold, fragrant with pine and the lingering scent of food and wood smoke. "Enjoying yourself." Cole's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him approaching, 2 cups in his hands. He offered one to her and she accepted gratefully. "Very much," she replied, taking a sip. It was coffee, strong and sweet. "I haven't attended anything like this before, no socials in Boston." He asked, leaning against a fence post. "Nothing so genuine," she said after considering her words. Everything there was about appearances, about being seen with the right people, wearing the right clothes. Cole nodded thoughtfully. "Out here, folks take you as you are, they have to. Life's too hard to waste time on pretense." "I'm beginning to appreciate that," Rebecca admitted, "though I confess I still feel rather out of place." "You won't for long," he assured her. "Martha didn't once she got used to our ways." Rebecca looked at him curiously. "You seem to have known my aunt well." Cole took a sip of his coffee before answering. "When I first came to Willow Creek, I was in a bad way. The war. It left marks on me that weren't visible. Martha hired me to repair her roof, then found other odd jobs for me. She was a good judge of character, knew I needed work more than pity." "That sounds like what I remember of her," Rebecca said softly. "She was never one for sentimentality, but she was kind in practical ways." "She talked about you," Cole continued. "Said you had spirit. That you'd do well out here given the chance." Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes. "I wish I'd had more time with her." "She'd be proud seeing you tonight," Cole said, his voice low. "Making your way, starting fresh." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the remaining guests saying their goodbyes, the lanterns being extinguished one by one. "Mr. Preston," Rebecca began hesitantly. "May I ask you something personal?" He glanced at her, his expression guarded but not unwelcoming. "You can ask." The twins mentioned. "That is, they said you fought in the war. You must have been very young." Cole was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was distant, as if coming from somewhere deep within his memories. "I was 17 when I enlisted, lied about my age, thought I was being patriotic, doing my duty." He stared into his coffee cup. "I was 19 when it ended, but I felt 100 years old." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said softly. "I shouldn't have pried." "No need to apologize," he replied, his gaze returning to the present. "It's part of who I am, same as Boston is part of who you are." The simple wisdom of his words struck Rebecca. She had been trying so hard to leave her past behind, to pretend that the painful parts hadn't shaped her. But perhaps the key was not to forget, but to accept and move forward, carrying the lessons learned. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Turner," Cole said, straightening up from the fence post. "And for the conversation." "Rebecca," she said impulsively. "Please call me Rebecca." A slow smile spread across his face, genuine and warm. "Rebecca," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Then I'm Cole." As he walked her back to the house, Rebecca felt something shift inside her, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. Willow Creek was not Boston, and she was no longer the person she had been there. But perhaps that wasn't a loss after all. Perhaps it was the beginning of something new. The weeks that followed settled into a pattern for Rebecca. Her days were filled with teaching the twins, helping Mrs. Hanson with household duties, and gradually becoming part of the rhythm of ranch life. To her surprise, she found satisfaction in the work, in seeing the girls' minds open to new ideas, in the simple accomplishment of tasks completed well. She saw Cole frequently, though their interactions were usually brief, a greeting as he rode out with the other hands in the morning, a few words exchanged when he came to the house on ranch business. But each encounter left her more intrigued by the quiet cowboy with the thoughtful eyes. One Saturday morning in early June, nearly a month after the social, Rebecca took the twins for a nature study by the creek that ran through Hanson property. The girls were supposed to be sketching wildflowers, but as usual, their attention soon wandered, and they were now happily splashing in the shallow water, their sketching tablets abandoned on the bank. Rebecca sat on a sun-warmed rock, watching them with a mixture of exasperation and fondness. They reminded her of herself and her sister Caroline at that age, before society's expectations had molded them into proper young ladies. Caroline had married well and moved to New York, and their correspondence had grown infrequent even before their father's disgrace. Rebecca wondered if her sister even knew of their father's death, or if she cared. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. Looking up, she saw Cole approaching on horseback, leading a second mount, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "Miss Turner," he called, doffing his hat. "Ladies," he added with a nod to the twins who waved excitedly from the creek. "Mr. Preston," Rebecca acknowledged, then caught herself. "Cole," she corrected, offering a smile. He dismounted with easy grace, leading both horses toward her. "Beautiful day for a lesson," he commented, looking at the girls' discarded art supplies. "We were studying botany," Rebecca explained, "but hydrology seems to have captured their interest instead." Cole chuckled, a sound that Rebecca had come to treasure for its rarity. "Can't blame them. Creek's just right this time of year, not too cold, not running too fast." "What brings you out this way?" she asked, curious about the second horse. "Mrs. Hanson mentioned you don't know how to ride," he said, patting the mare's neck. "Thought you might like to learn. This is Daisy. Gentlest horse on the ranch." Rebecca looked at the mare with trepidation. "I'm not sure. Every woman in these parts should know how to ride," Cole said matter-of-factly. "It's not just practical, it's freedom, nothing like it in the world." The passion in his voice caught Rebecca's attention. She had seen how at home Cole was on horseback, the way man and animal seemed to move as one. "I wouldn't know where to begin," she admitted. "That's why I'm here," he replied with a slight smile. "If you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach." The twins, having noticed the new arrival, came splashing out of the creek, leaving wet footprints on the sandy bank. "Are you going to teach Miss Turner to ride?" Emma asked excitedly. "If she wants to learn," Cole confirmed. "Oh, you must." Elizabeth insisted, her wet hands clutching at Rebecca's skirt. "Cole taught us, and it's the most wonderful thing ever." Faced with their enthusiasm and Cole's patient gaze, Rebecca found her resistance weakening. There was something appealing about the idea of that freedom he'd spoken of, to move quickly across the land, to feel the wind in her face. "Very well," she agreed, standing up. "But I warn you, I may not be a natural." "We'll start slow," Cole assured her. "Just getting you comfortable with Daisy today." The next hour was a revelation for Rebecca. Cole was a patient teacher, showing her how to approach the horse, how to speak to her and touch her to build trust. He explained the parts of the saddle and bridle, demonstrated how to mount and dismount, and finally helped her up onto Daisy's back. The sensation was strange at first, being so high off the ground, feeling the horse's warmth and movement beneath her. But Cole stayed beside her, one hand on the reins, the other ready to steady her if needed, and gradually, Rebecca's nervousness gave way to excitement. "That's it," he encouraged as she straightened her posture. "You're a natural after all." The twins watched and cheered as Cole led Daisy in a slow circle, then gradually gave Rebecca more control, teaching her how to guide the horse with subtle shifts in weight and gentle pressure from the reins. "Can we show her the meadow?" Elizabeth begged when Rebecca had mastered the basics of starting, stopping, and turning. Cole looked to Rebecca questioningly. "It's not far, just over that rise. Beautiful view of the mountains." "I'd like that," she decided, surprising herself with her confidence. "Girls, You stay here and finish your sketches, Cole instructed. I'll bring Miss Turner back in a little while. The twins complained but eventually agreed, especially when Cole promised they could all go riding together another day if they behaved. As they set off, Rebecca at first concentrated intently on remembering everything Cole had taught her. But soon, she found herself relaxing into the rhythm of Daisy's walk, enjoying the gentle sway and the new perspective it gave her of the landscape. "You're doing well," Cole commented, riding beside her on his own mount, a powerful chestnut gelding named Rusty. "It's easier than I expected," Rebecca admitted, "and rather enjoyable." "Wait until you try a canter," Cole said with a grin. "That's when you really feel it like flying over the ground." They crested the small hill, and Rebecca gasped at the vista that opened before them. A wildflower-strewn meadow stretched toward distant mountains still capped with snow despite the summer heat. The beauty was raw and untamed, so different from the manicured gardens of Boston. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Cole told her, dismounting and helping her down from Daisy. "I come here to think sometimes." He tied both horses to a small tree where they could graze, then led Rebecca to a flat rock overlooking the meadow. They sat side by side, taking in the scenery in comfortable silence. "When I first came west," Cole said eventually, "I was angry all the time. The war had taken friends, taken parts of myself I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. But places like this, they started to heal something in me. The open space, the mountains that have stood for thousands of years, they make a man's troubles seem smaller somehow." Rebecca looked at his profile, struck by the openness with which he spoke of his struggles. In Boston, men never admitted to such vulnerabilities. "I understand," she said softly. "When I arrived here, I felt so lost. Everything I thought my life would be had fallen apart. But being here, seeing how people live so directly, so honestly, it's changing me." Cole turned to look at her, his blue eyes intent. "Change isn't always bad." "No," she agreed, holding his gaze. "It isn't." Something shifted in the air between them, a current of understanding and attraction that had been building since their first meeting in the church. For a moment, Rebecca thought Cole might reach for her hand or perhaps even kiss her. Her heart raced at the thought. Instead, he looked away, back toward the mountains. "We should head back soon. The girls will be getting restless." Rebecca felt both disappointment and relief. Whatever was developing between them needed time. She was still finding her footing in this new life, and Cole, she suspected, was cautious about opening his heart. "Yes," she agreed, standing up and brushing off her skirt, "but I'd like to come back here someday." Cole smiled as he helped her back onto Daisy. "Anytime you want, Rebecca. The meadow isn't going anywhere." As they rode back to the creek, Rebecca realized that for the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, she was thinking of the future with anticipation rather than dread. And Cole Preston, she was beginning to understand, might be a significant part of that future. The riding lessons continued through June and into July, becoming the highlight of Rebecca's week. Every Saturday, Cole would appear after breakfast, leading Daisy, and they would ride out together, sometimes with the twins, sometimes alone. Rebecca progressed quickly from walking to trotting, and finally to the canter that Cole had promised was like flying, and he was right. Their conversations during these rides grew more personal, more meaningful. Rebecca told Cole about her childhood in Boston, her dreams of becoming a writer that her father had discouraged, her broken engagement to a man she'd never truly loved. Cole shared stories of his life before and after the war, growing up on a small farm in Tennessee, losing his parents to illness, his experiences in battle that he spoke of sparingly but with raw honesty. July brought scorching heat, and the annual Independence Day celebration in Willow Creek. The entire Hanson household, including the ranch hands, traveled to town for the festivities: a parade, speeches, games for the children, and dancing in the evening. Rebecca, now much more comfortable in her new community, found herself surrounded by friends and acquaintances. Sarah introduced her to her brother Jacob, newly arrived from Kansas City, and for a time, Rebecca enjoyed his company and conversation. He was handsome and charming, clearly interested in her, and Rebecca was flattered by his attention. It was only when she looked across the town square and saw Cole watching them, his expression unreadable before he turned away, that Rebecca realized she felt nothing for Jacob beyond friendly regard. Her heart had already chosen, though she had not fully acknowledged it until that moment. Later, as musicians set up for the evening dance, Rebecca searched the crowd for Cole. She finally spotted him at the edge of town, leaning against a hitching post, looking as if he might leave at any moment. "Are you not staying for the dance?" she asked, approaching him. Cole straightened, surprised by her appearance. "Wasn't planning to," he admitted. "Getting an early start tomorrow. Mr. Hanson wants to move some cattle to the high pasture." "I see," Rebecca said, trying to hide her disappointment. "I thought perhaps, that is, I was hoping for a dance." Something flickered in Cole's eyes, hope, perhaps, or uncertainty. "What about Sarah's brother? Seemed like you two were getting on well." "Jacob is very nice," Rebecca said carefully, "but he's not the partner I was hoping for." The implication hung in the air between them, clear and undeniable. Cole looked at her for a long moment, then out at the gathering crowd, then back to her. "One dance," he finally said, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "For old time's sake." "For new beginnings," Rebecca countered softly. The music began, a lively reel that had couples forming all across the square. Cole offered his hand, and Rebecca took it without hesitation. As they joined the dancers, Rebecca felt a sense of rightness that transcended the music and the celebration around them. This man, this place, this life, it was where she belonged. The dance ended all too soon, but when Cole made to release her hand, Rebecca held on. "Would you walk with me?" she asked. "Just for a little while." They strolled away from the noise and crowd toward the quieter edge of town. The evening was warm, the sky painted in spectacular oranges and pinks as the sun set behind the mountains. "Rebecca," Cole began when they reached a small bridge over the creek that gave the town its name, "I'm not a man of means. I've saved some money, have some plans for the future, but right now, all I have is my job at the ranch and my good name." "I'm not looking for means," Rebecca replied honestly. "I've seen what wealth without character leads to. My father had everything society valued, and he gambled it all away, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises." Cole turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "What are you looking for, then?" Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "A partner. Someone to share life's joys and burdens with, someone honest and kind and brave." She took a deep breath. "Someone like you, Cole Preston." The vulnerability in her admission left her breathless, waiting for his response. For a moment, Cole seemed frozen, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. Then, slowly, reverently, he raised one hand to cup her cheek. "I've been falling in love with you since I saw you crying in that church," he confessed, his voice rough with feeling. "Didn't think a woman like you could ever look twice at a man like me." "Then you haven't been paying attention," Rebecca whispered, her heart soaring at his words, "because I've been falling in love with you too." In the golden light of sunset, with the distant sounds of celebration behind them, Cole lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but deepened as Rebecca responded, her hands moving to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both were breathing quickly, and Cole's eyes were bright with wonder and desire. "I should probably speak to Mr. Hanson," he said, still holding her close. "Ask his permission to court you proper." Rebecca smiled, touching his face in a gesture of tenderness that felt natural despite its newness. "Yes, you should. But Cole—" "Yes, I already know my answer." August brought changes to the Hanson ranch. Cole, with Mr. Hanson's blessing, began courting Rebecca officially. His riding lessons evolved into evening walks, Sunday picnics, and stolen moments of privacy that grew increasingly precious to them both. The twins were delighted with the development, declaring that they had known all along that Cole and their teacher were meant for each other. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch of the main house watching a spectacular thunderstorm roll over the mountains, Cole brought up a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "I've been saving," he said, his hand warm around hers. "5 years now, putting aside what I can. Mr. Hanson's offered me a chance to buy a parcel of land on the east side of the ranch, good water, good grazing. I could start my own small spread, build a house." Rebecca's heart quickened at the implication. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity." "It would be small at first," Cole continued, his eyes on the distant lightning. "Just a few head of cattle, maybe some horses. The house would be simple too, nothing like what you had in Boston." "Cole," Rebecca said, turning to face him fully, "you should know by now that I don't measure worth by such things." He met her gaze, and in the dim light of the porch lantern, Rebecca could see the hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "What I'm trying to say, not very well," he continued, "is that I'd like to build that life with you beside me, as my wife." Though she had anticipated the direction of the conversation, the actual proposal still took her breath away. For a moment she couldn't speak, overcome with emotion. Cole misinterpreted her silence, his face falling slightly. "I know it's soon. If you need time, yes," Rebecca interrupted, finding her voice. "Yes, Cole Preston, I will marry you." Relief and joy transformed his features. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. When they parted, both were smiling like fools. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted. "Was going to ride into town next week." "I don't need a ring," Rebecca assured him. "Just your promise." "You have that," Cole said solemnly. "And everything else I am or ever will be." The following day, they announced their engagement to the Hanson family over breakfast. Mrs. Hanson cried happy tears. Mr. Hanson shook Cole's hand vigorously, and the twins danced around the kitchen in excitement. "When will the wedding be?" Mrs. Hanson asked once the initial congratulations had subsided. Cole and Rebecca exchanged glances. "We were thinking October," Rebecca said. "After the harvest, but before winter sets in." "Perfect," Mrs. Hanson declared. "Just enough time to plan a proper celebration." In the weeks that followed, Rebecca threw herself into preparations not just for the wedding, but for the life that would follow. She learned from Mrs. Hanson how to manage a ranch household, how to preserve food for winter, how to treat common injuries and ailments when a doctor wasn't available. From Sarah, she improved her cooking skills, mastering hearty stews and biscuits that would sustain a hard-working husband. Cole was equally busy, working extra hours to save more money, making trips to the land he would purchase, and beginning to clear a space for their future home. They saw each other every day, but often only briefly, both exhausted by evening. One Sunday in late September, Cole suggested they ride to their meadow, the place he had first taken her when she was learning to ride. The wildflowers were gone now, replaced by golden grasses that swayed in the autumn breeze, but the view was still spectacular. "I thought we could use some time alone," Cole said as they dismounted. Feels like we've barely had a chance to talk lately." "I've missed you," Rebecca admitted, accepting his hand as they walked to their usual spot overlooking the valley. "I've missed you too." Cole pulled her close, kissing her with a hunger that spoke of their separation, brief as it was. When they finally settled on the rock, Cole's arm around her shoulders, Rebecca felt a contentment that still sometimes surprised her. 6 months ago, she had been at her lowest point, alone and grieving in a strange town. Now, she was planning a future with a man she loved deeply, in a place that had become more home to her than Boston ever had. "I've been thinking," Cole said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "The house won't be ready by the time we marry. Mr. Hanson says we can stay in the old foreman's cabin until spring when the weather's better for building." "That sounds perfect," Rebecca assured him. "As long as we're together, I don't mind where we live." Cole smiled, pulling her closer. "You might change your mind when you see how small it is." "I won't," she said confidently. "Besides, we'll be busy." Cole raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Starting a ranch, planning our home," Rebecca clarified, then added with a blush, "starting a family, perhaps." The look that came over Cole's face at her words was one she would remember forever, a mixture of wonder, desire, and profound love. "A family," he repeated softly, his hand moving to rest gently on her stomach. "Our family." "Someday," Rebecca said, covering his hand with hers. "When the time is right." They stayed in the meadow until sunset, talking of their plans and dreams, stealing kisses that grew increasingly passionate, until finally, reluctantly, they rode back to the ranch as darkness fell. October 12, 1876, dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day for a wedding. The ceremony was held in the same church where Cole and Rebecca had first met, now decorated with autumn leaves and late-blooming flowers from Mrs. Hanson's garden. Nearly everyone in Willow Creek attended, along with ranching families from miles around. Rebecca wore a simple gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Hanson had ordered from Denver, with a veil borrowed from Sarah, who had married the previous year. Cole, almost unrecognizable in a new suit, waited nervously at the altar, his eyes never leaving the church door until it opened to reveal his bride. The service was brief but deeply meaningful, with Rebecca and Cole exchanging vows they had written themselves. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Cole's kiss was both tender and possessive, prompting cheers and a few good-natured whistles from the congregation. The celebration that followed at the Hanson Ranch lasted well into the evening. There was feasting and dancing, speeches and toasts, and enough goodwill to warm the coldest heart. When it was time for the newlyweds to leave, they departed amid a shower of rice and good wishes, riding to the foreman's cabin that would be their first home together. The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a stone fireplace, a bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, and a few shelves for provisions. But Cole had prepared it lovingly, cleaning it thoroughly and adding touches like a colorful quilt for the bed and wildflowers in a mason jar on the table. "Welcome home, Mrs. Preston," he said softly as he carried her over the threshold. "It's perfect," Rebecca replied, meaning it with all her heart. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, the embers of the fire casting a warm glow over their new life, Rebecca thought of the path that had led her here, the sorrows and losses that had seemed so devastating at the time, but without which she would never have found this happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Cole murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "About how sometimes the worst days of your life lead you to the best," she answered honestly. "If my father hadn't lost everything, if my engagement hadn't been broken, I would never have come west. Never have met you." Cole propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with eyes that reflected the firelight. "I've thought the same about the war," As terrible as it was, it set me on the path that led to you. Do you believe in fate? Rebecca asked, reaching up to touch his face. I didn't used to, Cole admitted. But finding you crying in that church, being the one to help you that day, it feels like more than chance. Perhaps it was, Rebecca said softly. Or perhaps it's simply that good can come from even the darkest times if we're brave enough to keep going. Cole lowered his head to kiss her, a kiss full of promise and devotion. Either way, I'm grateful for every step that led me to you, Rebecca Preston. As am I, she whispered against his lips, for every step that led me home. Winter came early that year, with the first heavy snow falling in November. The foreman's cabin proved to be snug and warm, a cozy haven against the cold. Cole continued working for Mr. Hanson during the day, while Rebecca put her teaching skills to use, giving lessons to the twins and several other children from nearby ranches who couldn't make it to the town school during the winter months. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, Cole often working on plans for their house, while Rebecca read aloud or worked on her own secret project, a journal of their story, from their first meeting to their wedding day and beyond. She had rediscovered her love of writing, encouraged by Cole's genuine interest in her thoughts and observations. Christmas brought their first real challenge as a married couple. A severe blizzard hit the area on December 23rd, making travel dangerous. Cole had ridden to town for supplies and last-minute gifts, promising to be back well before dark. But as evening fell and the storm worsened, there was no sign of him. Rebecca tried to stay calm, telling herself that Cole was experienced and knew the territory well. But as the hours passed and the wind howled around their small cabin, fear took hold. Images of Cole lost in the snow, unable to find his way back, tormented her. By midnight, she was frantic. Just as she was considering trying to reach the main ranch house for help, a dangerous proposition in the blinding snow, she heard a sound at the door. Rushing to open it, she found Cole, covered in snow and half frozen but alive. "Thank God," she breathed, helping him inside and quickly shutting the door against the storm. Cole's hands and face were dangerously cold, his clothes soaked through. Rebecca worked efficiently, stripping off his wet clothing, wrapping him in blankets, and sitting him by the fire she'd kept blazing. Only when he was warming up, a cup of hot coffee in his hands, did she allow her relief to give way to anger. "You could have died out there," she said, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you stay in town?" "And leave you alone on Christmas Eve," Cole replied, his voice still rough from the cold. "Not a chance. I'd rather be alone on Christmas than a widow for the rest of my life," Rebecca snapped, tears filling her eyes. Cole set down his cup and pulled her into his arms, blankets and all. "I'm sorry for scaring you," he said softly. "Got disoriented in the storm, took longer than it should have. But I made it. I'll always find my way back to you, Rebecca." Her anger melted away as quickly as it had come, replaced by profound gratitude that he was safe. They spent Christmas Eve huddled together by the fire, sharing the simple gifts they had managed to get for each other: a new journal and pen for Rebecca, a finely crafted leather belt for Cole. "Next Christmas we'll be in our own home," Cole promised as they drifted off to sleep. "With a bigger fireplace and maybe a little one to celebrate with us." Rebecca smiled at the thought, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. She had suspected for a few weeks now, but hadn't yet found the right moment to tell him. Perhaps Christmas morning would be perfect. When dawn broke clear and cold on Christmas Day, Rebecca woke to find Cole already up, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Preston," he said, bringing her a steaming cup. Rebecca sat up in bed, accepting the coffee but setting it aside. "I have another gift for you," she said, suddenly nervous. Cole looked at her curiously. "You didn't need to get me anything else." "This isn't something I bought," Rebecca explained, taking his hand and placing it gently on her abdomen. "It's something we created together." For a moment, Cole looked confused. Then understanding dawned, his eyes widening with wonder. We're going to have a baby," he whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make it untrue. Rebecca nodded, tears of joy filling her eyes. "In June, I think." Cole's expression transformed, a smile breaking across his face that outshone the winter sun streaming through their window. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass, priceless and fragile. "This is the best gift I could ever receive," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Rebecca, for loving me, for being my wife, for carrying our child." "Thank you for giving me a home," she replied softly. "Not just a place to live, but a place to belong." The news of the baby lent new urgency to their plans for the future. By March, the snow had melted enough for Cole to begin work on their house on the land he had purchased from Mr. Hanson. Rebecca would ride out to join him when her teaching duties were done, bringing food and helping where she could, though Cole insisted she avoid any heavy work in her condition. The house took shape quickly, a simple but sturdy structure with 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a comfortable living area with a stone fireplace modeled after the one in the foreman's cabin that had served them so well. Mr. Hanson and the other ranch hands helped with the raising of the roof and walls, while Mrs. Hanson and the women of Willow Creek contributed furnishings, curtains, and practical household items. By late May, with Rebecca's pregnancy advancing rapidly, the house was ready for them to move in. It still needed finishing touches. Some floors weren't yet polished, and the porch lacked a railing, but it was habitable, and more importantly, it was theirs. The day they moved in, Cole carried Rebecca over the threshold just as he had at the cabin. But this time, he didn't set her down immediately, instead carrying her through each room, showing her all the special touches he'd incorporated with her in mind: shelves for her books, a window seat where she could read and watch the mountains, a rocking chair by the fireplace for nursing their child. "Cole, it's perfect," Rebecca said, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Better than any Boston mansion." "It's just a beginning," he told her, finally setting her gently on her feet. "We'll add to it as our family grows, make it grander year by year." "It doesn't need to be grand," Rebecca assured him, looking around at their simple but beautiful home. "It just needs to be filled with love." "That," Cole said, pulling her close, "is something we have in abundance." June brought scorching heat and the final weeks of Rebecca's pregnancy. She found herself increasingly uncomfortable, the baby active and her body unwieldy. Cole was attentive and caring, taking over household chores and ensuring she rested despite her protests. Mrs. Hanson visited frequently, bringing advice and reassurance. "First babies often come late," she told Rebecca during one such visit. "And when the time comes, send Cole for me and Sarah. Between us, we've helped bring more than a dozen babies into this world, but the baby had other plans." On a sweltering night in mid-June, Rebecca woke to sharp pains and the alarming realization that her water had broken. Cole, instantly alert at her first gasp, quickly assessed the situation. "I'll ride for Mrs. Hanson," he said, already pulling on his clothes. "There's no time," Rebecca managed between contractions that were coming with surprising speed and intensity. "The baby's coming now, Cole." For a brief moment, panic flashed across his face. Then, with the same calm determination he showed in all crises, Cole took charge. He built up the fire, put water to boil, gathered clean linens, and helped Rebecca into a position that seemed most comfortable for her. "Tell me what to do," he said, holding her hand firmly as another contraction racked her body. Despite her pain, Rebecca smiled at the man who had faced war and wilderness without flinching, but now looked terrified at the prospect of delivering his own child. "Just stay with me," she said. "We'll figure it out together." The next few hours were a blur of pain and effort for Rebecca. Cole was her rock, supporting her physically and emotionally, following her instinctive directions and offering constant encouragement. As dawn broke over the mountains, their son entered the world with a lusty cry, delivered safely into his father's waiting hands. "He's perfect," Cole whispered, tears streaming down his face as he placed the swaddled infant in Rebecca's arms. "You're both perfect." Rebecca looked down at their son, overwhelmed with love for this tiny being who had her eyes and Cole's strong chin. "What shall we name him?" she asked, though they had discussed names extensively during her pregnancy. "Samuel," Cole said without hesitation, "after my father, if that's all right with you." "Samuel Preston," Rebecca tested the name, smiling as the baby's tiny hand wrapped around her finger. "It's perfect, Mrs." Hanson and Sarah arrived an hour later, having been fetched by one of the ranch hands who'd come to check on them. They found the new family peacefully together, the birth already successfully completed. After examining both mother and child and pronouncing them healthy, Mrs. Hanson couldn't help but laugh. "Well, Cole Preston," she said, hands on her hips, "seems you've added midwife to your list of skills." Cole, still gazing at his son in wonder, shook his head. "It was all Rebecca. I just caught him when he arrived." "Nonsense," Rebecca countered from the bed. "We did it together, as we do everything." That evening, as twilight settled over their new home and Samuel slept peacefully in the cradle Cole had crafted, Rebecca sat in her rocking chair by the window, watching her husband as he gently touched their son's tiny fingers. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said softly. Cole looked up, the love in his eyes so powerful it took her breath away. "When I knelt beside you in that church 4 months ago, I had no idea I was meeting my future," he said. "The woman who would become my wife, the mother of my child, the center of my world. And I had no idea that the letter that brought me such sorrow would lead to such joy," Rebecca replied. "If I hadn't been there, crying over that letter, I'd have found you eventually," Cole said with certainty. "Some things are just meant to be." As night fell over the Colorado wilderness, the little house on the Preston Ranch glowed with lamplight and love, a beacon of hope and happiness in a world that had once seemed so dark to both of them. In finding each other, they had found not just love, but home, family, and a future brighter than either could have imagined when fate first brought them together in a small church in Willow Creek. 5 years later, the Preston Ranch had grown from a modest homestead to a thriving operation. Cole's natural ability with horses had led him to specialize in breeding and training quality mounts for ranchers and the occasional cavalry officer. Rebecca, meanwhile, had established a small school in a converted barn on their property, teaching not only their own children Samuel, now 5, and his sister Martha, 3, but several others from neighboring ranches. The house had expanded as well, with Cole adding a proper schoolroom attached to the main building and a larger kitchen to accommodate Rebecca's newfound passion for baking. A wide porch now wrapped around 3 sides of the house, offering spectacular views of the mountains and a perfect place to watch the sunset after a long day's work. One crisp October evening, remarkably similar to their wedding day, Cole and Rebecca sat on that porch, watching Samuel teaching his sister how to rope a wooden practice calf Cole had built. Rebecca's hand rested on her stomach, where a third child was just beginning to make its presence known. "He has your patience," Rebecca observed as Samuel carefully corrected Martha's grip on the small rope. "And your way with teaching," Cole chuckled, And your stubbornness. Won't quit until he gets it right. A valuable quality, Rebecca defended with a smile. Cole took her hand, his expression growing more serious. 5 years ago today, you made me the happiest man alive by becoming my wife. Every day since has been better than the last. Rebecca squeezed his hand. Even the day Samuel decided to see if his toy boat would float in the well. Even then, Cole confirmed with a laugh. Because every challenge we face together just makes what we have stronger. Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play as the setting sun bathed everything in golden light. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come into the church that day? Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes. But then I remember what you told me once, that some of the worst days of our lives can lead us to the best. If you hadn't been crying over that letter, if I hadn't felt compelled to check the church before heading back to the ranch, we might never have met. I like to think we would have found each other somehow, Rebecca said. That God or fate or whatever you want to call it wouldn't have let us miss each other entirely. Mrs. Preston, Cole said with mock seriousness, are you becoming a romantic in your old age? Rebecca laughed, nudging him with her elbow. 25 is hardly old age, and yes, perhaps I am. You've had that effect on me, Mr. Preston. Cole's arm tightened around her shoulders. I love you more today than I did when I married you, he said softly. Didn't think that was possible, but it's true. And I love you more with each passing day, Rebecca replied, turning to kiss him gently. With each challenge we overcome, each joy we share, each child we welcome. As darkness fell, they called the children in for supper. Later, after Samuel and Martha were tucked into bed, Cole and Rebecca stood in the doorway of their children's room, arms around each other, watching them sleep. We've built something beautiful here, Cole whispered. Not just the ranch, but this family. We have, Rebecca agreed. And it all started with a letter and a kind cowboy who took the time to kneel beside a crying woman in a church. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her from the refined drawing rooms of Boston to this simple but beautiful life in the Colorado wilderness. The sorrows of her past, her father's disgrace, her broken engagement, her aunt's death had led her to a happiness deeper and more meaningful than anything she could have imagined. And Cole, the quiet cowboy with the troubled past and gentle heart, had shown her what true love looked like, not the shallow social arrangements she had known in Boston, but a partnership of equals, built on respect, trust, and unwavering devotion. As she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, Rebecca thought again of that fateful day in the church, of the letter that had seemed to signal the end of all her hopes. Instead, it had been the beginning of her real life, a life filled with love, purpose, and the kind of happiness that comes only from finding where, and with whom, you truly belong.